to elicit such an image for such a transparently and politically motivated attack on Ilhan, we are getting to the level where this is an incitement of violence against progressive women of color. And if they can't figure out how to get it back to policy, we need to call it out for what it is, because this is not normal, and this is not a normal level of political debate or rhetoric. As wild as it can get, sometimes this is something beyond what is normal.
Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defending her fellow freshman Congresswoman Ilhan Omar earlier today. Joining me now are Rabbi Rachel Timoner, the senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Elohim in Brooklyn, New York, Waleed Shahid, who's a spokesperson for Justice Democrats, and Christina Greer, associate professor of political science at Fordham University. Rabbi, I'll start with you. There's been a lot of, obviously, conversation around Ilhan Omar, some of it tense, some of it quite angry, some of it quite, I think, interesting in terms of the directions it's gone. The cover of the paper in your hometown today, what do you make of it?
In New York, I don't want to see September 11th being used for political purposes. That's painful for New Yorkers, and that's wrong. It shouldn't happen.
The thing that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said is that there is a real threat here of danger to Congresswoman Omar. Like, that is just a fact. We just watched someone go into a mosque in two mosques in New Zealand. We had someone shoot up a synagogue based on a right-wing conspiracy theory. We had the president's superfan try to assassinate 24 of the most prominent of his critics, a lieutenant colonel in the Coast Guard who got caught with a stockpile of weapons in Ilhan Omar's name. Like, there's a serious concern here.
Or 3 churches in Louisiana who were just burned down to the ground, or the Highlander Center in Tennessee that was also burned down to the ground. So there are a few things going on. One, we know that women of color are disproportionately attacked, whether they are pundits on television or whether or not they're elected officials, and so we're seeing that.
You mean in sort of public, social media way, criticism?
There's the gender piece, there's race piece, and there's intersectionality, where there's lots of sort of white supremacists and also just good old-fashioned racists who feel the need to attack women of color, especially in positions where they're speaking out. The second piece is, taking a snippet of what someone says and grossly mischaracterizing it. When Ilhan Omar is someone who has fought for the Victims Compensation Act for victims of 9/11, something that Republicans have not tried to do, right? And they want to keep all of the money to themselves and sort of perform that they care about New York and 9/11 survivors. But when it comes time to putting up the money, they haven't done that. And then I think the third piece, which is really important, is we have to remember what Colin Powell said about Barack Obama when Donald Trump was saying all this during the 2008 election. He's a Muslim. Can we trust him? And Colin Powell said, as a Republican, okay, so what if he is a Muslim?
Right.
What's wrong with being a Muslim? We've had 400 years of Muslims being in this country, working and praying and serving this nation. What's wrong with being a Muslim? And one of the first things that President Trump does is the Muslim ban.
Yeah.
So, so many Republicans and Republican pundits are following the orders of the executive, and that is what's really dangerous, and it's highly problematic, and she's clearly a symbol for so much hate and attack, especially from certain networks that...
Yeah, I should note that in 2008, I don't think it was Trump saying that Obama was a Muslim back then. It was a lot of other people.
I'm sorry.
It was a few years later.
2009,
yes,
he decided that
the birther controversy. There's also just the fact that I think there's a degree to which they're showing themselves on this because, the previous rounds of comments, both the sort of all about the Benjamins tweet and other stuff, like I had people in my life and people that I respect and people I view as good faith interlocutors who had beef with that, and this seems like just a bad faith, out of context hit job to me.
I mean, there's a 200-mile-per-hour ideological right-wing war machine coming after Ilhan Omar and also Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. My question is, where is the Democratic Party leadership on this? You didn't see that many comments today from candidates running for president in 2020. You didn't see that many comments from Nancy Pelosi or Steny Hoyer or Chuck Schumer, for that matter. Instead, what we've seen is a pattern from the Democratic Party leadership that tries to distance themselves away from these 3 women, instead of seeing these women as the rising leaders in the party who they have to fight for. When you are faced with this war machine, you've got to fight back, and you've got to defend people in your party. And just last week, Nancy Pelosi said something like, the women with the large amounts of Twitter followers are not necessarily representative of the Democratic Party. But I think we need a Democratic Party that actually fights for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for Ilhan Omar, for Rashida Tlaib, against these attacks because they can't keep running away from it and, you know, make fun of them at AIPAC like Schumer and Hoyer did, or pile on the attacks. So I was actually pretty saddened to see it was just these women sticking up for each other, the three women who I've mentioned, and Ayanna Pressley, but not much from the leadership.
I would love to say something about that. Look, Representative Omar has said some things that have used anti-Semitic tropes, and it's legitimate to call that out. It's important to call that out. When anti-Semitism appears on the right or on the left, it's a growing problem in our country, and we need to name it, we need to understand it better, we need to call it out. But the Jewish people, and anti-Semitism are being used as a weapon by the right and by the Republican Party, and the president has no standing to do that after Charlottesville, after Sebastian Gorka, but they're doing that, and they're using us, and we don't want to be used that way.
Right.
Especially as a cover for racism or Islamophobia. Instead, the Republican Party should stop using us in that way because it's actually harming us. Because it's making it as if anti-Semitism is just, the claim of anti-Semitism is just a tool or just a game, and it's not a game, it's real.
I mean, the point to me here is that, like, people's fates are bound together.
That's
right? I mean, ultimately, and that's really what this comes down to. I mean, I have to say what you said about the war machine, like, it's crazy to watch the war machine go to war. Sometimes it goes after an adjunct professor at NYU out of nowhere, who they just decide, we're going to take this person, put them on TV, and blow up their lives. In this case, it's a public figure. That's legitimate. You can go after a public figure, member of Congress, a public figure. But to me, that cover is just an escalation, right? Like, they have her in their sights. They are going to go, like...
Well, because she is everything that they hate, right? She's a woman, she's a person of color, she's black, she's a refugee, she's a former immigrant, she's a Muslim, she's petite, and she is very smart.
I don't know, do they hate petite people?
And we can add all of these things up, right? And she's not afraid of them.
Yeah.
And she comes with a band of 3 sisters, which is very intimidating for them, and it makes them furious because she does represent America, and that's not the America that they see.
The not being afraid, I think, is a key part here. I want to play this part of the speech because I think it shows kind of where she's coming from in all this. Take a listen to what she had to say at a longer part of that speech, taken out of context. Take a listen.
Muslims for a really long time in this country have been told that there is a privilege, that we are given, and it might be taken away. We are told that we should be appropriate, we should go to school, get an education, raise our children, and not bother anyone. Not make any kind of noise, don't make anyone comfortable. Be a good Muslim. But no matter how much we have tried to be the best neighbor, people have always worked on finding a way to not allow for every single civil liberty to be extended to us.
I mean, part of that, Waleed, to me is like when you talk about the Democratic leadership doesn't want a bunch of controversies every week, right? Like, from their perspective, it's like Ilhan Omar does not care that they're coming after her, clearly. She's not going to be cowed. I think that's also true of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's true of Rashida Tlaib. And the sort of posture in politics of the Democratic leadership is like, we don't want to be on Fox News every night, and we don't want to be fighting these defensive fights.
Well, we're kind of in a battle globally for, like, the fate of multiracial liberal democracy, so they don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
Like, Ilhan Omar represents multiracial liberal democracy just like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez does, or Rashida Tlaib. That is the fight that we're having all over the world, from America to New Zealand, and we really have to, the Democratic Party needs to be the fight of multiracial, the party of multiracial liberalism. Conservatives are going to war for conservatism. Liberals should go to war for liberalism.
Well, war in a rhetorical sense.
Yes.
Just to be clear, Rabbi Rachel Timoner, Waleed Shahid, Christina Greer, thank you.